Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens.
Diddy may have been acquitted of some pretty big charges at his criminal trial, but he still was convicted of 2. So what's next for him in terms of sentencing, his finances, facing a wave of lawsuits, including a brand new one from a former exotic dancer who claims Diddy drugged and assaulted him, caused him to lose teeth and have to get gastric surgery? We're going to talk about it all right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan, they're investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or go to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Well, after the monumental verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial, the question now is, what is next for him, right? You got sentencing, civil suits, a lot to get into. So while Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking charges that he was facing, he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited, to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in a dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. Right. They don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event. So he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If the case was, if they had called, let's say, Christina Quorum, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying her rent, messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. Cassie had messages, too, that were problematic that showed, if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not, but if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane or you didn't call in Amia or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, but do you feel that the prosecution could have won this case if they structured it differently, if they called different witnesses?
That's a great question. And that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, with the impact upon the jury and would the result have been different. The fundamental problem, I think, is that this was kind of always a round peg in a square hole. The arson, that domestic violence video that we all watched, that's horrific. All of that should have been prosecuted as state crimes in Los Angeles. That as a fundamental, starting point.
Well, they couldn't do it now. It was time barred.
No, of course, the statute is run on everything.
Yep.
But he would have been prosecuted for exactly what he did instead of predicate acts into a RICO theory. Now, RICO, as we know, was designed for essentially mafia organization, for organized crime. And the idea is simply because there's a legitimate business, like in The Godfather, they had a legitimate olive oil importing business, and that was but it was still a criminal enterprise. The real thing was the mafia. The real thing was the organized crime surrounding the Corleone family, to use an example that everybody can probably relate to. So simply because their olive oil importing business was legitimate, that's not a defense to a RICO thing. That's the current state of the law. What they did here is they took a business that was always legitimate, Bad Boy Records, that was always and the purpose is to make music and make money. Everything surrounded that, and the defense argument, which they obviously argue very effectively, was that is not a criminal enterprise. enterprise. So the very first element of RICO has always been problematic from the very beginning. You and I talked about that 2 months ago when this whole thing started, and that's so it's and the jury. This was a sober jury that the questions were serious and direct, and they sent that note out regarding juror 25 right at the very beginning, saying, "Hey, this guy's not deliberating." And so this was a serious group, and the Mann Act, they did convict on that. So they were, by the fact that it was unanimous, meant that they were getting along. Federal juries tend to be, in California anyway, we have they draw our state juries off the DMV database. That's how you get jury duty, is from the DMV. Federally, it's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote, and you tend to get a more serious class of juror in federal court, which I think is interesting. So to answer your question, it's something that we could kick around for years.
Sure.
But I think the fundamental problem here is that it was always kind of a misfit for a RICO theory. Just like the sex trafficking, sex trafficking requires fraud, force, or coercion, right? So that essentially is the same elements of rape. So you essentially, it's transporting somebody under circumstances that equate to rape. It's something forceful, something fearful. That it just doesn't fit very well here, especially when you're talking about all these people who they're orbiting him. They're all trying to advance their own career. And when the defense attorney got up and said, Cassie got $30 million as a result of her settlement, right? And that was a big move.
Yeah, I wasn't sold for that personally, because I was like, the prosecution came back and be like, she already settled. What's her incentive to come here and lie? What's her incentive to be a part of this? And that for me, but I think the messages, the conduct that arguably contradicts someone being a victim, and I know there's complicated factors between an abuser and a victim, the trauma, I get it. I totally understand it, but I wonder if that's what settled the jury. Okay, I want to move past the verdict, because now we have to talk about what's happening next. First thing, when the sentencing hearing is going to happen. So they have this hearing next week about whether to expedite the sentencing, happening before October 3rd. If both sides agree, great. If they don't, what is a compelling legal argument for the defense to say, we want this sentencing to happen much sooner?
Well, we know that behind the scenes, what they want, of course, is they expect a chance that he's going to be released. So that's their big motivating factor, of course. Whether the court abides by that, it is a substantial change in circumstance. He was acquitted of all of these serious charges, right?
But he was just denied bail. He was denied bail again.
He was denied bail again, and I actually learned that on your segment yesterday afternoon as I was sort of doing my preparation for this. But we have to remember that one of the things that he got in trouble for, that Diddy got in trouble for in jail, was using other inmates' calling number. Remember that? So he was calling witnesses in the case from jail using other inmates. That was a direct affront to that judge. That was remember, we had all those attempts at bail that were denied at the very beginning of the case, one after another after another. This judge, and it's the same judge who's going to sentence him, denied that over and over again. And you and I, again, in another conversation we had on your show, we both said he is screwed now, that he's got no chance because he's violating the rules of the court while in jail. So if he's disobeying the rules of the jail and the directive of the court while he's in custody, how can he be expected to actually follow the terms of a bail agreement when he's out of custody?
Right.
And I think that chicken is coming home to roost again. I think that's what happened yesterday afternoon. That any judge who has a criminal defendant who behaves like that is an affront to the court itself. It's disrespectful to the court, and it's almost like he couldn't get out of his own way there at the beginning. But he had an excellent defense team.
He does. So assuming for a moment, whenever the sentencing hearing happens, right? Let's say it happens in a month from now. Let's say it has October 3rd. The question is, what's his sentence? As we mentioned, the prosecution in a filing from yesterday talked about the guidelines range being 51 to 63 months. Now, this is before a pre-sentencing investigation and report. Now, the defense, right, they want 21 months. He's already served almost 10. Talk to us about what you're thinking here, because there is no minimum. The maximum's 10. If the judge were to combine it together, like you said, 20 years, feels highly unlikely that would happen. As we're talking, what is a pre-sentencing report investigation? How would it affect this? What do you think the judge is going to do? There's so many different factors to consider here, and it's not like a murder case when it's like, okay, we know what's going to happen. It's like life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a given. There's room here. What do you think the judge is going to do?
So in federal court, this is actually very interesting. They rely very heavily on those pre-sentencing investigations. So essentially what will happen is there'll be a federal probation officer, and they do these for almost every case, where they will do their own investigation, where they'll talk to family members, they'll talk to employers, they'll talk to neighbors, and they will make a recommendation to the court as to suitability for release, suitability for time. And that's something that federal judges traditionally really adhere to. They tend to put a lot of weight on those, far more than they do in state court. The probation department can make a recommendation, but the DA will certainly have more ability most of the time to talk a judge in or out of a sentencing recommendation from the probation department. Federal court is different. They really put a lot of weight on those. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. And a lot of that will come down to what the individuals involved in that investigation, even though it shouldn't impact their professional recommendation. It's really, I think we're going to see what they thought of the case. Did they think he got away with something horrific here? Did they think that he was getting railroaded from the beginning? I think that may reflect in the recommendation of the court. But of course, we don't know what that is yet. I don't know. If I'm his defense lawyer, I don't know if I am pressing the gas on that, trying to make this thing go faster. I mean, it's coming up. It's coming up soon enough anyway. I would want to give them the time and not press them, because you don't want a probation officer or anybody in the federal system to feel like they're being rushed.
Right.
Because I think it's very easy to just go, okay, screw it, the guy should stay in.
The prosecution made the point yesterday. They said the point, like, we're not ready to give a really sentencing recommendation. We haven't gotten the report. There's people say, well, maybe he'll get time served, right? He's been locked up. There's other people say, no, the judge is going to throw the book at him. Even though the judge said yesterday, even though I'm denying him bail and I'm looking at certain conditions, this is not reflective or a preview of what my sentencing recommendation or what my sentence will be. But, are we looking at double digits? Are we looking, you think, at 1 to 5 years time served? I know it's so impossible to ask, but it is a very specific charges he was convicted of.
Yeah, we're not looking at double digits.
Okay.
I cannot imagine the court imposing that. And remember, because this law is so old, and we're in an age of Uber, so literally somebody in New York City, a man or a woman who engages the services of a sex worker who lives in New Jersey, and if they pay for their Uber, that technically is a Mann Act violation. Okay, so it's a morality crime, and that it just does not carry the same weight.
Will the judge say, hey, listen, multiple instances he was doing it, not one Uber, he was doing it multiple times. You have 2 alleged victims here, Cassie, Jane, and violence, right? He used violence as one of the reasons to deny him bail. I wonder if he's going to look at, even though he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, different characteristics and components of his relationships with Jane and Cassie and say, this is aggravated.
It's a very interesting question. Can the court aggravate nonviolent offenses that he was convicted of, which are the Mann Act violations? Can he aggravate those when he was acquitted of the more serious charges, essentially acquitted of everything that involved violence, threats, all of that sort of thing? So It's a very, very interesting legal question.
Real quick, asset forfeiture. What is that exactly? How would it work with Mann Act convictions?
I just don't see the feds being on very strong ground to seize a bunch of assets. And here's why, Jesse. Most of the federal cases where you have, especially RICO cases, an actual RICO case is an actual corrupt organization that the purpose is, like I had one in Salt Lake City last year. It was a fraud case where it was one of these calling room scam operations. Every dollar that they made in that, they made out of the bank account of some poor innocent victim who got scooped up in their scheme. So every dollar, everything they bought, every car, every house, everything that they owned was a direct result of money that they gleaned from innocent people. Those are the cases, or narcotics. We see this all the time in narcotics cases where but it's the same principle. All the things that they have are a result of narcotics profits, right? So when you look at one of those cases, you're seizing assets. Here, we've got mansions all over the place. We've got planes. This is a very, very wealthy man who made that money legitimately in Bad Boy Records in the music industry and in the film industry. That's how he made his money, and that is not a product. And that's where we come full circle to this square peg and round hole regarding the RICO theory on this. The money, he didn't make any money from the freak-offs. He didn't make any money from all of the alleged things he did. He didn't make any money from that horrible video that we saw where he's beating Cassie in that hotel. That's not the source of his income. So I think, again, I don't think that the feds or even the court, I don't think the court would look kindly on that. And there's an old adage in the law that you and I have talked about before. Bad facts make bad law, right? And if they run around and try to seize a bunch of stuff based on this, they're literally taking assets from a citizen that earned them legally. He may be a villain, he may be a bully, he may be a horrible person, but he made that money legally. He was not charged here with tax fraud, which means he paid taxes on it. He got accountants, he put it all together. So I don't see this judge. I think it'd be a very poor move if they try to take a bunch of his stuff. I think that they still have to create a nexus between the Mann Act violations and his property, and I just don't see it.
I don't see it. Okay, well, he might need the money. Why? Because he's got a plethora of civil lawsuits that he's facing now. By the way, in fact, Tenny Garagos had something to say about that yesterday.
Sean Combs has not sexually assaulted anybody. I've been saying this for months. We've said it with each lawsuit that came out, and today that was proven true. The media got it wrong about Sean Combs every single day for nearly 2 years. I ask that for every time you guys see a civil lawsuit, criminal complaints or criminal indictments, you actually take a look and analyze these and see whether or not these are actually going to stand up in a court of law, because today they did not.
So Sean Combs, he is facing dozens of sexual assault lawsuits. In fact, Vulture recently clocked it at 66 women, men, minors, drugging, sexual assault, violence. Matt, first of all, does the criminal case have any effect on the civil suits? And let me just ask you about this. You have at least one of the people who testified in this case who's a plaintiff, right? Dawn Richard, former Danny Kane band member, claims she saw Combs assault Cassie. Combs threatened her allegedly when she tried to intervene. She claims she was sexually harassed. So the idea of the criminal case affecting any of the civil cases, let's start there real quick.
Well, what's very interesting about civil versus criminal cases is when somebody's convicted, of course, in a criminal case, because the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, it's called collateral estoppel. It means that for a civil case based on the same event or the same actions, you automatically win the civil case. Okay, so in other words, we saw this with Mike Tyson and his rape conviction, right? When he was convicted of rape, because it was beyond a reasonable doubt, and because the civil aspect only requires proof to a preponderance, that woman a million years ago when that case happened, all she had to do is prove damages. So it's already been proven, all right? What happened here, because he was acquitted of all these allegations, now each one of these plaintiffs bears the burden of proof. So this was not only a huge win for him criminally, this was a big win for for Sean Combs when it comes to all those pending civil suits, because now those same people, in theory, would have to come in and testify. And remember, Don Richard is a good example. The cross-examination of Don Richard was excellent in my assessment. And I trained young prosecutors for years on how to do cross-examinations. I've taught it in law schools. That cross-examination was biting and it was really good. So now Don Richard, in her case, she's been really, I mean, ripped apart, I thought, on cross-examination in this case. So now she's kind of wounded. Her civil suit is, that's her statements are all admissible in that. She really, there's some things she said on the stand that I think were very harmful to her case. She can still proceed with that. But I mean, if I'm her plaintiff's lawyer, I would be trying to find some sort of settlement and number. Who knows? These people, there's a lot to be said for this idea that they were all jumping on the bandwagon trying to get money. I think that argument, most judges are going to allow the defense to make that argument. So I think that some of them will settle. Some of them may still go to trial.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. If they don't settle, real quick, would he just try to get rid of them as quickly as possible? Does he say, first argument is I'm going to try to, anybody who's testifying, anybody who's suing me under a pseudonym, I'm going to try to convince the court that they can't proceed under a pseudonym, because if they now have to reveal their names, maybe they'll be like, okay, I don't want to move forward. Or does he just move for a motion to dismiss on all of them? Can he try to group them together? I know I'm asking like complicated, like how to deal with 66 lawsuits at once, aside from the money that's going to go into it. Yeah.
Each one of those cases will have its own individual merits, and each one will have to be addressed separately. So yeah, he's going to have to pour a lot of money into his legal fund, but he was looking at life in prison. So, how much of his fortune will go into defending all those lawsuits? Probably a substantial amount. But as we know, he's the guy has been able to pick out good musical talent and also good legal talent.
Yeah, and it does become a question what his career will be like after. Okay, before I let you go, I have to ask you about this new lawsuit that just came out. We're talking lawsuits. So there's a lawsuit that was filed just 2 days ago. This is a lawsuit filed out in California State Court. Edmund Laurent, former exotic dancer. He's filed a suit against Combs and a Jane Doe and other unnamed people, listing causes of action of assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, sexual battery, civil conspiracy, aiding and abetting, violation of the California Civil Code. Laurent alleges that he was this star model, this actor, this bodybuilder who was highly sought after for music videos in the 1990s and 2000s, like with Tupac, Dr. Dre, Britney Spears. Actually, embedded in his complaint are pictures of him with various celebrities. And then he mentions he rarely consumed alcohol, he didn't do drugs. He claims he was friendly with Sean Combs, having seen him on music video shoots. But then he alleges this. He alleges how he did some work as this male entertainer for bachelorette parties. And on one occasion, he arrives at an LA hotel where Combs and Jane Doe are wearing masks. He performed a private dance. A few days later, he claims he gets another call for Combs and Jane Doe. He alleges that Jane Doe propositioned him for sex. Combs purportedly said he wanted this and how much it turns him on to see a man having sex with his girl, so he agrees. Laurent alleges that he kept on contacting him, and on another visit, Combs and Jane Doe unmasked themselves, asked him to apply excessive amounts of baby oil. They allegedly spiked his drink. He claimed on another occasion he applied baby oil that was tainted with GHB, and during sexual intercourse, Jane Doe broke the condom that he was wearing on purpose with her fingernails, despite him previously saying he didn't want to have unprotected sex. He alleges at that point Combs kind of went behind him, whispered into his ear sexual commands. He claims he felt trapped, uncomfortable. He recounted a really graphic alleged scene where Combs physically grabbed him. And he documents another incident where he claims he was drugged, woke up naked, slathered in baby oil, felt pain in a certain region of his body. He claims he developed warts. He would vomit, gastric issues, had to even undergo surgery. He embedded photos of the surgery scars in his lawsuit. He says he was once this muscular physique, now no longer. He had stomach issues, gum issues, enamel erosion, bad breath. He says he suffered immediate long-term physical and psychological harm. A lot of information there. But here's an example of a new lawsuit. How does Diddy respond to that?
Well, there are so many problems with that lawsuit, especially now. He hasn't been convicted, and they filed out, I believe, before the acquittal, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, right before the acquittal. So, look, there are so many problems with that. First of all, GHB I've done a bunch of GHB cases as a prosecutor and also representing victims. GHB has a metabolic half-life of 40 minutes. So I guarantee he has no proof of the GHB allegation. So there's parts of that don't make sense. That's a case that, Combs is going to have to be, he's going to have to be going through these lawsuits, figuring out which one of these he wants to try to settle monetarily and which ones are going to be worth actually going to trial on again. That's one, who knows, and there's also some statute problems here, Jesse, that I know you probably also recognize immediately. This is, depending on the year that this allegedly happens, some of these may be time barred. Yeah. So there's going to be certainly some legal action trying to get them dismissed for statute of limitations violations. And it'll be interesting. But again, he's got dozens and dozens of these things. But he will have freedom at some point. He will, which is something that a week ago, a lot of people were predicting he was never going to see freedom ever again. So at the end of the day, these lawsuits will work their way through the system. I'm sure some of them will be dismissed on their merits. Some of them will be, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them proceeded to trial, but I bet we're going to see his legal team trying to settle and get rid of as many of these as possible.
And I think for the lawsuits that were filed during the criminal trial or after, it becomes an argument. Okay, is all this true? I mean, it's Diddy's alleged MO. It's matching a lot of what was said in the criminal case, or do you have a plaintiff who's taking parts of the trial, putting them in a lawsuit, fabricating it? It'll be a question that maybe a jury or a judge will ultimately decide. Matt Murphy.
That's right.
Thank you. Yep, Matt Murphy, thank you so much. I know you're a busy man. I'm going to let you go, but thank you so much. It was great seeing you.
Happy to be here always. Look forward to the next one.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.